Okay. Today's date is November 6, 2024. This is Luciana Spraker representing the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives. I am interviewing Mrs. Jessie Collier DeLoach for the Savannah Community Memory Project, and we are conducting this interview at Mrs. DeLoach's home in the Cloverdale neighborhood. So I thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Let's start by having you tell us your full name.
Well, I am Jessie Collier DeLoach, and I'm also, I don't use my middle name that my dad gave me, Ruby. I was named for my mother. Her name was Jessie Ruby Davis. So after I got married, I just used my maiden name and my married name. So, but.
Okay. So, when were you born?
August the 3rd, 1929. In Savannah, Georgia.
Well, that was my next question. Where were you born? Were you born in a local hospital?
No, I was born on West Broad Street. My dad had his own dry cleaning and pressing establishment, and it was at 1812 West Broad Street.
So that address was his business address?
Yes, it was Collier's. My dad was James E. Collier, and it was Collier's Pressing Club and Cleaning Establishment.
Nice. Well, I was going to ask you a little bit about your dad. So the name Collier is a big name in Savannah. I know recently there was the Collier House on Victory Drive that was being talked about. Are you part of that larger Collier family?
Yes. The Collier House on Victory Drive, that was one of my dad's brothers, and he had another brother who was a physician who lived on East 37th Street, but
Okay, and your father was James E. Collier and your mother Jessie Ruby Davis.
Yes.
Okay. Were they both from Savannah?
I know my mother was born in Walterboro, South Carolina, and she told me, that at age 18, she and some of her family members came to Savannah, and having been brought up in Presbyterian school and worship, she looked for a Presbyterian church that she could attend. And at that time, there was only one Presbyterian church where she was welcome to attend, because that was during the time of segregation. And that was Butler Memorial Presbyterian Church. It was on East Broad Street at the time. But in the meantime, my dad was already a member of that church. So apparently, when she came to that church, I guess he decided, I'm gonna get to know her better. She was only 18, and at that time, he was 30, and he was, like I said, had his own business and whatnot. But, to that union, I was the firstborn of that union.
So were they married then in Butler Memorial Presbyterian Church?
I know they didn't have a wedding, so I don't know if they were actually married in the church, but I'm pretty sure the fact that they were married by the pastor at that time.
Did your mother work outside of the home?
No, not until after my father passed. During the time that, she was having her family, she was home and she assisted him in his business. Things like sewing, because he had a dry cleaning and cleaning establishment. Clothes that had to be altered, in any way, making adjustments. That was something that she could do. And then she said she even learned to operate, the equipment that he used, so that she could help in quite a number of ways.
Yeah. What year did your father pass away?
He passed away in 1963.
And your mother?
My mother died in 1997.
So you mentioned you were the firstborn. Tell me about your siblings.
Well, I have a sibling. The one that's next to me was James Edward Collier Jr., named after my dad.
Ever, Eber?
Huh?
His middle name is
Edward.
Edward.
My mother used to always tell me that had I not been the firstborn, had the firstborn been a boy, my dad would have been satisfied naming the boy after him. But since I was his firstborn, she said he insisted upon naming me after her.
Nice.
She often said that she would have made a different name that she considered a pretty name.
Uh-huh. Well, rubies, I mean, that's so pretty. I envision, red jewels when I hear that.
But that was not her first name. Her first name was Jessie, and like I said, she was from a family of 16 siblings.
Wow.
And so she said that she definitely would not have named me after her.
What do you think being named after her?
Oh, I just cherish it because my dad wanted me named for my mother. I just felt good about that. And so I wouldn't change it. And there are different ways that people spell Jessie. Some of them spell it the way it is in the Bible, the masculine form. But on my birth certificate, it's Jessie, because that's the way hers was spelled. Mm-hmm. And so I don't change it and put the Y's and all that stuff. I just put it just the way it was on my birth certificate.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were born at 1812 West Broad Street. Is that where you grew up as a child?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So what was that neighborhood called? Or is it called? Is that Kyler Brownsville?
Later it was called Brownsville, but during that time, I don't think the neighborhood was given any particular name. And of course, I went to Florence Street School, but before going to Florence Street School, I went to kindergarten. And
where did you go to kindergarten?
Well, it was on Klein Street. It didn't have a name, but there was a teacher, Miss Woodruff, who was my kindergarten teacher. And my dad, somehow or another, he just felt that, well, when I was 3, I was ready to go to kindergarten. And then by the time I was 5, he felt that I was ready to go to elementary school. And although most of the students who went to elementary school, they started at age 6, my mother said, my dad insisted that what I had learned while I was in kindergarten, and at age 5, I was ready to go to school.
And so you went to Florence Street School.
I went to Florence Street School.
Tell me a little bit about that school.
Well, my first teacher was Agatha Curley Cade. She was my first grade teacher. And then I went on in 2nd grade, Miss Presley, and then 3rd grade.
You still remember all their names?
Yes. I had Miss Skipper, and in the 4th grade, Miss Nancy Houston Walker. In 5th grade, Miss Ella Mae Lovett. In 6th grade, Jeanette B. Hayes.
How did Florence just go up to 6th grade?
Yes, at that time, our elementary schools went from 1st to 6th grade.
Okay. Where did you go after that?
It was called Kyler Street School, and it was a part of Beach High, so they referred to it as Beach Kyler.
Okay, and so then you graduated from Beach High School?
Yes, I did.
What year did you graduate?
I graduated June the 5th, 1946.
Tell me a little bit about those schools. Were you aware that you were growing up within a segregated school system?
Well, I knew that there were things that only my particular race, could do, and places where we could go. And my dad, he would carry me a lot of places. I can remember him taking me to the Telfair Academy while I was still a child. He would take me to whatever activities were going on. And when school activities were happening, being his own proprietor, he would come to the activities during the school day, especially if I was a participant. And so I did get to go places because he took me many places.
It sounds like he was very involved in your
Yes.
childhood. I'm going to go back to school in a little bit later, but I want to kind of talk a little bit about what it was like growing up in your neighborhood, like what games you played, what you guys did for fun.
Well, actually, when I was growing up, we played games like just hopscotch on the sidewalk and jackstones and things like that, and dodgeball, and just nothing I can recall that was unusual, but it was just.
Are there any significant businesses or leaders from that area that you want to talk about?
I can't think of any particular one, but I know the one that was right next door to my dad was Swedenberg's Jewelry Repair. And I mean, it was right almost adjacent to his establishment. And Mr. Swedenberg had a daughter whose name was Bertha. And although she was like, I just maybe a teenager while I was a little girl, my mother said that when someone came looking for Mr. Swedenberg, and if I knew that he was not home, she said, I said, Bertha's Papa Daddy ain't home. And she said I was only 3, and but I could call her Bertha, and I knew if her dad had gone somewhere, I could just tell.
That's fine.
Because I called my daddy Daddy, she called her daddy Papa. So I told her, Bertha's Papa Daddy ain't home.
Do you remember as a child going with your parents to shop on West Broad Street or Broughton Street?
Oh yes, my mother would take me with her when she went what we call downtown, and of course, as it was, there were just certain places that she would go because of the.
Can you name some of those?
Well, when we had to go get things like shoes and things that she couldn't make, because she made most of my clothes when I was growing up.
Do you remember any of the names of the stores that she would go to?
Well, if I'm thinking that Globes was already there, because I know my shoes had to be. At that time, she said I had narrow feet, and so she had to get shoes that would fit my feet. But and they used to have a streetcar on West Broad Street at that time, so sometimes we would ride the streetcar, but we did a lot of walking, and I even got a chance to, as I grew up, walk to the library, Carnegie Library, and there were just places that, when we needed to go, we walked. Because even though my church was on the east side, it was on East Broad Street, I would walk to what they call Daily Vacation Bible School. And so it was just something that I became accustomed to doing, just walking quite a bit.
So after you graduated Beach in 1946, what came next? Did you go to college?
Yes, I did. I went to Savannah State College. At that time, it was called Savannah State College. I mean, it was called Georgia State College. And there were, I liked arithmetic for quite some time, but I also liked making, because of math, I like drawing things to scale, like, just making, like, as if I was an architect, drawing things. So I thought maybe I wanted to do interior decorating when I went to college. But because my dad had also he had gone to college out at Georgia State. At the time, he said when he went there, it was Georgia Normal College. But because of the fact that I wanted to do things like architecture and interior decorating, that was not being offered at that time. So the president of the college, I got the opportunity to actually talk with him, and he told me that since I liked mathematics, that I should major in that, and it would serve as a background for a lot of things that I might want to do later. So that's what I did. I majored in mathematics.
And was he right? Did that lead you down a career path?
Well, it did, because after I graduated from Savannah, it became Savannah State College during
While you were there?
my senior year.
Okay.
And after graduating, I wanted to become a teacher and teach mathematics. So I went downtown. Now that I had graduated, the superintendent said, "You're only 20 years old." He said, "When you can teach in the elementary school if you desire." He said, "But I'm not going to hire you to teach in high school because you're only 20. But I was interested in teaching mathematics or teaching some of the subjects that you would get in high school. I wasn't anxious to just teach the little darlings." And so someone that I met in college had gone down to a place called Folkestone, Georgia.
Okay.
And he called me, he said, "If you don't have a job yet," he said, "come down here. The superintendent is allowing me to make some suggestions and recommendations for teachers," because it was a rural area, and it was just sort of like a school with a very small 10, number of students that could attend. So I went down there, and I did get hired.
And how long were you down in Folkestone?
Well, actually, I was in Folkestone for, I put it like this, 11 years altogether. But right after my first few months in Folkestone, since we would sometimes come to Savannah, those of us who lived in this area, to be with our parents on the weekend, the young man that I met in college, he was a veteran, and he would, he got to know my dad, and apparently he told my dad that he wanted to marry me.
And who was this?
And so that was during the Christmas of 1950. And so in June of 1951, we were married, June the 5th, 1951.
What was his name?
Robert Fulton DeLoach.
So he was from Folkestone or Savannah?
He was from Savannah. His mother lived in Savannah, and my mother lived in Savannah. And he was a junior. He was named for his dad. And so, like I said, in June the 5th, 1951.
So when he told your dad that he wanted to marry you, was he on your radar to marry too?
In other words, since he would come to Savannah to see his mother, I would come to Savannah to see my mother. We would see each other during the weekends and whatnot. And so that was just one of the things that Christmas, when he gave me an engagement ring.
What did your husband do for a living?
Well, since his major was education also, he became the principal of that school in Folkestone. And that's why the superintendent allowed him to get the staff. And it was a very small
Oh,
school.
he's the one who invited you down to be a
Yes,
teacher?
yes,
Gotcha.
yes.
What was the name of that school?
Well, at first, because it was in Folkestone, they just called it Folkestone School. And it was sort of like the Folkestone School at that time for colored children. But during the time that we were there, some of the things that we did in the community, it just helped to encourage the people to let their kids stay in school longer than just in the elementary grades. And so eventually the school enrollment grew a little, and a school, they were building a school, and that school, he helped them to realize that it should be named for someone outstanding in education. So it was named for Mary Bethune-Cookman. But Mary Bethune, I think she became a Cookman later. So it was called Bethune School.
Okay. What brought you back to Savannah?
Well, that's home, and that's where my mom was, and I had other siblings. It was his home, that's where his mom was. And so, but before coming back, while I was still a teacher at Folkestone, I had an opportunity to work on my master's degree. And so the superintendent allowed me to take a year's leave from teaching. And I went to Atlanta University and worked on my master's degree in mathematics. And so that was the year 59-60, because I received my master's in the summer of 1960. And then I went back down there because I had been given an opportunity to have a year's leave. So after getting the degree, I went back. So the year 60, 61, I worked down there also.
When you came back to Savannah, did you keep teaching?
Yes, I came back and I had no difficulty getting a job teaching high school math then.
What schools did you teach at?
Well, when I first got hired to teach, I was sent to Tompkins High School. And so I had an opportunity to teach mathematics there.
Did you stay at Tompkins, or did you go?
Oh yes, I stayed at Tompkins because we still were having desegregation, and so I was at Tompkins. I'm trying to think now how many years, but I do know the first year of desegregation, because I was one of the teachers with a master's degree. I was pulled out to go to Jenkins to teach mathematics.
How did you feel about that?
Well, I just felt that I was still teaching math. And the young people who were in high school at that time who were taking math, especially those who were taking things like algebra and geometry, they were interested in learning. It wasn't like just dealing with people who, like it was just required that everybody take this. And so those who were taking the algebra and geometry, they were fairly good students, and I enjoyed my experience. And then that first year of my teaching at Jenkins, the Board of Education here started deciding that, well, they would apply for grants and whatnot, and they needed a statistician and all like that. I was pulled out of the classroom to go to the central office and be a statistician and work.
Did you enjoy that?
I enjoyed that also. So
But did you end up going back into the classroom?
yes, and so after that was sort of like a 3-year program, and then after that program ended, I still had more years to make up before having 30 years, because a teacher could retire with 30 years of teaching.
Okay.
And so I was sent, after I left Tompkins, to Groves High School. That's the school where I did my last year of teaching in the classroom.
Well, what year did you retire from teaching?
I retired, and that was what, 82? Yes, I think it was
Around 1982.
I think so. I had to stop and think.
What did you do then?
Well, I had planned to just sort of do some things, but because of the situation that the school board was, they only had one person on the board that looked like me, and I got to know her well. Her name was Esther Garrison, and so she told me that was her 20th year, and she was not going to be on the board any longer, because the board had been made up of persons selected, not elected. And in the meantime, I had colleagues that I met in college and while I was working that said that they wanted an educator on the school board. Said because they were getting ready to have an elected school board. And after Elsa told me that she was not going to run anymore, I allowed them to support my being elected. And their efforts proved that I did get elected to the school board.
Well, it's important to have an educator's perspective, I would think.
And so I was one of the first, of my race elected to the school board here in Savannah.
So how long did you serve on the school board?
Well, after the first term ended, they had 4-year terms. My colleagues told me, said, no, you can't just stop now. So they worked to get me re-elected. And then after every 4-year term, I was reminded, no, you have begun things that we want you to help follow through. I got re-elected. And before I knew it, I had been on the school board for 20 years. And so my husband was still working. I put it like this, he was a principal of a middle school. And then when they built new middle schools, he was one of the principals who was sent to one of the new middle schools. So the school that is now named Scott Middle School, he was the first principal of that school, but it had just been built. So it had not been named yet when he was there. So again, he worked with community and whatnot to encourage them to determine a name for that school so that it would honor people of their race who had made contributions that were worthwhile. So that school became Scott Middle School, and it was named for Walter Scott.
Okay.
But the things that, we had done during that time, I just felt that, and my husband said, okay, you have been in education now 30 years teaching, 20 years school board. He said, that's enough, we're going to travel some.
Well, before we leave the school board, tell me a couple of things that you're most proud of working with the board on towards.
Well,
or even challenges, things that were hard.
Well, you know, I can't think of anything in particular that I did, except that I tried to encourage students to know that it's helpful to be able to think logically. Mm-hmm. And so when you are doing your math problems, it enables you to sort of determine how to come up with conclusions when you apply some of the things that you have learned that we can call logical reasoning. And so I, don't know any specific things that I did, except that I run into students every now and then who said that they appreciate what they learned under my tutorage.
Yeah, well, and you saw a lot of change in the school system here because you grew up in segregated schools, started teaching in segregated schools, but then went through the desegregation process. Is there you want to reflect a little bit about what you saw in 50 years of schools in Savannah?
Well, it's difficult to point out any particular thing, but I do know that before desegregation, the parents were a lot more involved than they are now. And so when we had activities, they were very supportive. And the children, realized that it was to their advantage to stay in school, whereas now, kind of often, they have so many other things that they can do that they don't seem to be quite as anxious to remain in school. Because during the time when I was teaching, they didn't have a lot of choices of what they could do in their careers. They could become teachers and maybe just work in hospitals in some manner, but they didn't have a whole lot of choices. But after desegregation, and that's what I call it, because I think we still don't have integration. We just have desegregation.
Yeah. So you and your husband both retired then, fully from
No, we didn't retire at the same time. I retired after those 50 years.
Yes.
And the very year 2004, which was it was my 20th year on the school board, the school system was in the process of renovating where they had their school board meetings. Mm-hmm. And when they renovated and got a new facility for the school board meetings, they honored me and named the school board meeting room in my honor. And so I was, that I just could hardly believe that they thought to honor me in such a manner.
Well, it sounds like you earned it. So tell me a little bit about, let's talk a little bit about your personal life. So your husband, Mr. DeLoach, do you have any children?
Yes, that's another thing. During those years of working in Folkestone, I became a mother, but I would work as long as I could before delivery and then go back to work. But there was one year that I did not work. I was expecting the baby early in the year, so I didn't work work as a teacher that year.
So tell me a little bit about your children. What are their names?
Well, my firstborn is Robert DeLoach III. He's named for his dad. And then the second one is Taryn, and my mom named him, and she said we're gonna call him Taryn Montuello. And so since my married name was DeLoach, he was Taryn Montuello DeLoach.
Okay.
And then my third child is Linda, and so I thought maybe we would name. I was not the one that decided that she should be named Linda, but I thought that since she was going to be named Linda, we would spell it Lynda, and that one of her grandmothers was named Jane. We would spell the Jane Jayne.
Okay, you like the Y.
She's Linda Jane DeLoach, but that that's basically. And of course, like I said, being a mother, I was very busy, but.
Did any of them follow in your path as an educator?
Not one.
Not one.
But now, Linda did become an archivist, and so I think that's very much.
Yeah, definitely aligned with educational goals.
Yes,
Yeah.
because she, while she was in college in Minnesota, I think that there were things that she felt she wanted to. I guess they were just so special to her that they were of a historical nature, and that's another thing. Her dad, his major before becoming a principal was history. And it seemed to me like in so many ways she did some of the things that her dad did.
Yeah. So we are sitting in your home in Cloverdale. When did you move to Cloverdale?
Well, actually, when we first came, this part of Cloverdale had not been developed yet, and there was one house across the street that was the model home.
Uh-huh.
So we came to Cloverdale. I'm not Cloverdale, but the area where Cloverdale Drive is, that part was already there. Mm-hmm. So we were living there on Cloverdale Drive before coming into this area.
This is the Bel Air section,
yes,
right?
Yes,
Yeah.
And so during that time, we just wanted to come and see what was being planned, and so we were interested in building a home in this area, and so that's what we did in 1968.
You built this home in 1968, and you've been here ever since?
Mm-hmm.
What do you like most about the Cloverdale neighborhood?
Well, at the time, because of most of the people owning their homes, they continued to keep them up. And they tried to keep the neighborhood looking, attractive. And the people were very supportive of whatever activities we had when we formed our association. And, it just, I think the camaraderie of the group, even though there may have been people from different age groups, the children and all just enjoyed the area. And as my children were growing up, that's when desegregation of the schools came about. So the children from this area were sent out of their neighborhood to the Windsor Forest area.
Wow, that's pretty far.
Yeah, and so
where would they have gone? Where did they go before desegregation of the schools?
Well, we had Beach Junior High, which was still on the campus of Beach High at that time. And during the time that the school board was deciding to have middle schools, and like I said, some of them were built, my husband was one of the first ones who was named a principal of a middle school. But the students in general who lived in this area, they went to those schools that were still in this area.
Okay.
And it's just that, just like our children were sent out of the neighborhood, there were hardly any that came to us. One or two of the faculty members from other schools were sent to our area, but most of the just say changes occurred by removing our educators and sending them into those areas that they wanted to desegregate.
Okay.
Just like they sent our children to Windsor Forest.
For the neighborhood of Cloverdale, are there any important community leaders or business leaders that came out of this neighborhood that you want to mention?
Well, we have I know we have some that I just don't want to just call special names right now, but Carthon had his own business, and he was one of my neighbors, and we had Williams had a service station. He was one of my neighbors, and I'm just trying to think of names of people who.
Well, if anything comes to you, you can let me know. So I want to go back a little bit to Butler Presbyterian Church, because you've stayed a member there, haven't you?
What's that?
Butler
Oh yes,
Presbyterian.
my parents, like I said, that was their church. So that's the church in which I was christened. So I came up in that church, and I'm still a member of that church. I have been a part of the choir from the time I was in the children's choir, in the junior choir, and now in what we call the chancel choir. So I've been in that church all my life.
And singing the whole time. You've been involved in many different social and civic organizations in Savannah. The list was very long, but I wanted to know what group or groups that you have worked with and served with are the most important to your life, and why?
Well, one of the things that my husband and I enjoyed was the symphony. And so one of the organizations to which I became attached was the Women's Savannah Symphony Women's Guild. And then I grew up as a Girl Scout, and so we worked with that. And then we had just in addition to just trying to get people to work, I was a part of the Retired Educators, Association, and it seems as though if it wasn't in American Association of University Women, whatever groups, and of course it's another thing. My husband was a part of different organizations to which he belonged, and so those organizations would honor their wives, just like if he was in an organization called the Mutuals, I was a mutualette. If he was in one called the Falcons, I was a Falconette. And we were organized. We would do things. We tried to do things that we considered worthwhile in the community.
You were involved in the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority?
Oh yes, I, I I became involved in that while I was in undergraduate on Savannah State's campus. That was not established until during my senior year. So this year is the 75th year for that chapter. So it's also my 75th year in the sorority.
Wow.
And in my sorority, when you've been in it for 75 years, you are classified as a diamond soror. If you've been in it 50 years, so through the years, I have been a silver star, which is what you become for 25 years, and then a golden soror for 50 years. And now we have a level called pearls if you've been in it for 65 years, and a diamond if you have been in 75 years.
What are you going to be when you hit 80 years? That sorority does a lot of good work locally. They're involved with the Greenbrier Children's Center, is that correct?
What's that now?
Are they involved with the Greenbrier?
Oh, yes. Our chapter of the sorority, Gamma Sigma Omega chapter, that's the local graduate chapter. The chapter on campus that was established while I was in college is Gamma Upsilon. So I was one of the charter members of that chapter. And so, but the graduate chapter was composed of women who were already sorors from wherever they went to college.
Their chapters.
Yes. And so they helped to establish Greenbrier. So they're really given the honor of being one of the founders of that organization, Greenbrier Children's Center.
Wanted to go back, you said you grew up as a Girl Scout. Tell me a little bit about that. Who were your troop leaders? What troop were you in?
Well, I was in Troop 52. And one of my teachers, Dorothy Uri Adams, at the time she was Dorothy Uri, she was one of the Girl Scout leaders. And so I was in Troop 52.
Where did you all meet? I mean, maybe my question is, did it come out of the school or your church? Where did the troop kind of come from?
Well, it didn't have anything to do with the church, and it was not a part of a school per se. And when we met, I'm trying to think, did we meet at the library? Because we had our, Girl Scout troop meetings, and it had nothing to do with either the church or the school.
Okay. And this is, I'm assuming this was a segregated all-black girl troop?
Yes.
So I saw in your biography that you were involved with King Tisdale Cottage Foundation, the local Asala branch, the local NAACP. All of those organizations are strongly tied to the work of W.W. Law. Did you work with Mr. Law at all?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, you want to tell? I mean, we have a very large law collection, so I'm always interested in hearing about people's experiences or memories.
I didn't get a chance to work with him very long, but I even knew him, from childhood, because his mom and my mom knew each other. But by the time I came back from Folkestone and was becoming involved in local activities, he didn't survive much longer after my getting back to Savannah. So I didn't get a chance to actually work with him on organizations, but some of the organizations that you mentioned, we would do things because of his input in helping them to have been established or whatnot. And so I got elected to be on the King Tisdale board, and there were one or two other boards that was elected to be a board member, but I didn't get a chance to actually just work side by side with him too much because of his passing right after I got back to Savannah.
So I have a couple sort of maybe silly questions, but what was your favorite area of math to teach?
Well, it is difficult for me to say which one is the favorite.
They're like all your children.
But I'm thinking perhaps it's probably geometry. Because in geometry, there's so many things that you have to establish proof to show that it is a fact, why it worked out to be the way it did. And I also, like I said, I enjoyed algebra, trigonometry. It's just that it's just difficult to say what the preference was, but I'm just thinking perhaps geometry.
Maybe geometry.
Mm-hmm.
And is there any advice you would give to a young person today that's embarking on a career as an educator?
I think about the only thing I could say is that just to show how much you love what you're doing, because usually you can help people to become more interested in something when they realize that you're doing it because you want to, you enjoy doing it. You're not just doing it as a job, that you want to give them pointers on how they can improve. Mm-hmm. And you help them to know that even like in some games where the coach will help students become more advanced and more and accomplish more than the coach has. Well, as a teacher, you just like to help students realize that perhaps they have the ability to do some things if they just get involved and find out how enjoyable it is and how they can share it with others.
Was there a person that you might consider did that for you as an inspiration or a mentor to you?
Well, I did admire all of my instructors, especially those who taught mathematics. Martha Wilson was one of my instructors, and J.B. Clemens was one of my instructors in college. And I think the way that they helped me to feel how valuable it is to be able to just make use of what you have learned. You're not just learning something just to have it on paper, but it can be applied and made to be useful. And so I think that's one of the things I would let folks know, that don't just keep it to yourself.
That is the end of my list of questions. Is there anything that you want to share or talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, not in particular, except to say that I guess I consider myself fortunate, truly blessed, and thankful that my dad was able to spend a lot of time with me as a child, because some of the things that he instilled in me, I think that enabled me to just grow up knowing that, parents can just encourage students, can encourage their children by showing how much they love what they're doing, and making the child know that, yes, you're somebody and you can do something worthwhile.
Nice. Well, if you don't have anything else, that's a good note to end on. So I want to thank you for sharing your memories and your personal history and experiences with us. It's been wonderful.
I thank you, and I don't know why I've been given this opportunity to be so.
Because every single person has a story worth sharing. Everybody does.
Well, I'm certainly thankful that I'm one of them.
Great. All right.